Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alison, the online piano and violin tutor. If the violin is shaking when you're trying to do vibrato, that is the number one sign that you are attempting vibrato too soon. Number one, the first thing you're going to need is a violin. I have been playing the violin since I was 4 years old. I went to university and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in music.
With the amazing talent that's Alison Sparrow. Alison, come out here.
So bear with me if there are any technical hitches, I'm sure it'll be fine. For about 5 years I was an examiner for the London College of Music. And over the years I've seen basically the music world from every kind of possible view really, and because of that it has enabled me to write my own violin course. Hello everyone, welcome. So there we go, that's kind of all you really need to know. And don't forget guys, anyone can learn to play the violin. Hello everyone and welcome back. We got there in the end, 15 minutes late, but better late than never. Please tell me that you can all see and hear me. Say hello, tell me that you can hear me and see me. I'll just wait for someone to tell me because I know there's a little bit of a delay going on. Anyone? Getting a few hellos. Anyway, I use a program called OBS to stream this so that I can have all of this kind of stuff on there. Oh good, people can see me, excellent. Yeah, so I can have all of this going on there and I can have little pop-ups and things like that. But for some reason it did an update. There's been a new update on Macs. I use a MacBook and there's been an update to it and then it just wasn't connecting to any servers and it wasn't happening. So I'm really sorry. Now we're back on, it should be okay. Let's just hope we don't freeze halfway through. So let's get straight into the video. Now, I was going to do a little Q&A today about regarding all the questions that I seem to be getting on my channel, or questions that seem to be popping up all the time, but they're not really big enough or long enough or meaty enough for me to kind of make a separate video on their own. So I've just made a note of a few of the main questions that keep popping up, and I've got one specifically from Mia, who I know is going to be watching this week, about key signatures again. So I'll just see if I can go over that. Just very quickly before we do, you all know the drill. Any of you that don't know, or any new subscribers to my channel, hello, welcome. It's nice to have you here. This is my 1 to 30 violin course. So if you're looking for a course to start playing with, I know a lot of you here already have that course and are getting on great with it. But it's a 1 to 30 violin course, which guarantees to take you from a complete beginner, you don't know anything about anything, to a very decent, accomplished, intermediate violin player. And all the details of the course are there. The first 10 lessons are absolutely free with all the materials and everything that you need. So you've got absolutely nothing to lose there. So let's just jump into it. So one of the main questions I get asked, before I go into the questions, I will answer a few questions that I've just got in front of me, and I've just made a few notes so that I don't forget what I want to say. And if any of you have any questions, put them in the chat box, whichever way the chat box is sitting on for you. Put them in the chat box. I think it might be that way, and I will get to I'll get to those questions a little bit later on. So yes, let me know if you have any questions. So I thought I would answer a few questions that I get on my channel here, as well as any questions that I get in the chat box that are coming up, and I will get to those after I've gone through this. So let's get back to this one. Now, one of the main questions that I get asked is, what size violin do I need? So it seems like a pretty obvious kind of question, but what size violin do I need? Well, you need a full size violin. So violins come in a few different sizes. Full size violin is 4/4, like 4/4. If you are an adult, that is the size that you will need, and that is that. There's nothing else that you'll need. So if you are trying to shop for someone younger, a child for you, then that's where it gets a little bit complicated. So you can get quarter size, half size, 3/4 size, and then full size. It gets a little bit more complicated for me to guide you on what you might need if you are shopping for the violin for, say, a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or something like that, because it's one of those things where a half size might work for them or a quarter size. It depends on It sort of depends on how big they are for their age. I've taught 6-year-olds that have been really tiny, and they've had to have, some of them have even had an eighth size violin. And I've taught some 6-year-olds that have been, twice the size of that, height wise and everything. So then they need a more like a half size violin. So I would say a full size definitely if you are an adult. And I do have a violin. I can link a violin. I do have a video link, which I'll link underneath this, showing you the different sizes and how you can measure them. And they're based on arm length. But suffice to say, if you are an adult, if you are kind of 17 and above, you will need a full size violin. You can get a 7/8 violin. Not very many places sell them. I know the Fiddler Man or Fiddler Shop does sell. I'm pretty sure last time I looked, I'm pretty sure Fiddler Shop, Fiddler Man, whatever, does sell a 7/8 violin on his shop, but they're very few and far between. So those ones are in between a 3/4 size violin and a full size violin. So sometimes it doesn't always look it in the video because of the angle or the way the video is set up or whatever. But in some of my videos, this doesn't always look like a full size violin, but I can guarantee you it is a full size violin. So a half size violin, a 3/4 will just be a little bit less than this. And then a 7/8 will be sort of somewhere in the middle of those. Now a 7/8 violin is really good if you are a smaller adult or somebody more petite. So I have had, I don't know, 1 or 2 students over the years, not anybody that I've got recently, but over the years I've had 1 or 2 adults that have had the 7/8 violins, because a full size violin is just that little bit sort of too long for them, but a 3/4 is just that little bit too short. So it's good for that, the 7/8, but that comes with a caveat, because the 7/8 violins are just not, they're very few and far between. So you're not going to have your pick of everything. You're just going to be able to sort of choose one. So that's the only downside with that. So if you are an adult, that's what you will need. If you are shopping for a child, then it's either best to go to a shop and have them try them with them and measure them out and that kind of thing. Or if that really isn't an option for you, have a look at the video underneath, and there are some arm measurements with violin measurements, and that's the best thing that you're going to be able to go on. So that is that. The next question that always seems to come up on my channel is, what is the difference between the violin and fiddle? So I have gone through and I have made some notes. So I'm just going to read off of these notes. So I've taken a bit of time to do that. So generally the violin and the fiddle are just, they're referring to the same instrument. So this is a violin. This is also a fiddle. It's both the same thing. Really, the crux of it is that the main difference between the violin and a fiddle is just the way it's played and the style and type of music. But other than that, both are played exactly the same way. I can play fiddle on this. I can play classical music on this. It's still a violin. So the violin and a fiddle are exactly the same thing. It's just like, some people call the violin a fiddle anyway, but they mean violin. It's just more of a, maybe more of a slang term for violin, but it's exactly the same thing. But here are some key differences or distinctions between the two. So the playing style. The violin is more for classical music. So when we think of the violin, we're playing Mozart, we're playing Beethoven, we're just playing more general classical kind of style, including Western music or anything like that. And we kind of imagine it more in formal settings as well, concerts and that kind of thing, orchestras. When someone plays the violin, it usually implies a classical or orchestral style of playing with a focus on precision, can't get my words out, precision, technique and sheet music. Whereas you compare that with a fiddle, and the fiddle is often associated with folk, country, bluegrass and other traditional kind of music genres. So it's more emphasis on folk tunes and improvisation, and just more based on tradition. The repertoire, again, as I just sort of briefly mentioned, the repertoire with the violin, you're thinking mostly things like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, that kind of thing, sonatas, concertos, chamber music, etc., etc. And then with fiddlers, they're going to be playing things like folk tunes, so jigs and reels and all that kind of stuff there. And and then often music is passed down through the generations as well. With the technique, the violin follows very, very strict technique. So it is all about the technique. It is all about the perfection. The intonation is perfect. All the little bowing techniques that we have to do. There's so much more that we kind of learn when we're thinking of the violin and we're thinking more classical music, whereas fiddle players are going to be using all the fiddle style type music, is going to be slightly more relaxed with relaxed bowing technique, not so much emphasis on particularly intonation, although generally the intonation should be good all round anyway because it's going to sound rubbish. But the technique, the style of music doesn't really call for a lot of technique, so we don't need to be doing martelé bowing, staccato, spiccato bowing, and all that kind of stuff that needs to be, red hot when we're playing classical music with the violin, for example. So the technique is just a lot more relaxed, I would say. And then the instrument setup. So this is quite an interesting one. This is probably the only sort of physical difference that people would see between the two, aside from them both, this being both a violin and a fiddle, would be that the fiddlers might use some steel strings for just a more brighter, more resonant kind of sound because they want to project a little bit more, and maybe a flatter bridge. So I'll call myself a violinist because I don't really play fiddle music. So we as classical violinists, we want a nice curved bridge because we want to be able to isolate those strings perfectly. But if you are a fiddle player, you might want the bridge just a little bit flatter. And the idea of that being is that you're going to be playing a lot of strings together, so creating a lot of fifths and things like that. So it's a lot easier to sort of do that. And that's why fiddle players are very good at doing the double stopping, because the bridge is ever so slightly flatter, because almost every note they're playing is double stopped anyway. And by double stop, we mean playing two strings, i.e. two notes together at the same time. So that is that. I hope that kind of answers the question there. So it like I say, it comes up a lot with fiddle playing. And getting straight into the next questions before I get on to some of the questions that I can see coming up in the chat. A few of you ask a lot of questions about things like string buzzing and really weird things that kind of happen in the violin. So if you've got something like string buzzing generally tends to occur when the strings come in contact with the fingerboard or other parts of the violin, just causing a little bit of a buzzing. So it might be anything to do with, for example, over the years I've seen students have things trapped inside there, a little bit of a stapler randomly that someone had in there once, a lead of a pencil that, when the little tip comes off, people have had inside, all sorts of things you've had inside there, and it all causes a little bit of a buzz, all the way to having jewelry as well. The jewelry I have on at the I have these on pretty much all of the time. They don't really cause a problem for me because they're not big chunky necklaces, but if you've got anything like that on, sometimes I do sometimes get a very slight buzz, and I know it's probably just because this is just touched my chain at just the wrong part, so I'll just adjust it and then it'll be absolutely fine. So it could be if you've got any jewelry or any embellishments on your top or anything like that. Another thing you can check is fine tuners. Sometimes these, I know I've only got one on here, but some of these fine tuners, they can sort of start getting a little bit loose. So anything like that, or anything that generally, when you kind of shake it around, anything that generally doesn't sort of feel right, or anything that is touching. But if a string is buzzing as you're playing, it's because the string is in contact with the bow, hence that's why you're getting the sound, but also it's also in contact with something else, and it's that something else that we need to kind of figure out. So if you've had a good look around and you can't find any way to solve it, then you're going to have no choice but to take it to the shop or to a violin luthier or something like that. But 9 times out of 10, it's usually just something really, really silly kind of going on, or even to the point where one of the strings is actually loose. It's lost its actual tuning, and it's just unwound itself, and it's just come loose, and you didn't really notice it. Pegs slipping is another problem as well. So people often say their pegs slip. Now, depending on the type of violin that you've got, student quality, a little bit more than that, whatever, they will set these the pegs so that you can move them. So this violin is set up so that I can tune exclusively via the pegs. I have one on the E string here. The reason being is that because the E string is so fine, if you use the peg a little bit too much, you can just break the E string, because the E string is very, very thin. It's the thinnest string out of all of them, isn't it? So we don't really want to be we don't really want to be tuning the E string via the peg, because it's just that little bit too sensitive. It doesn't go out of tune that often, but with the amount we need to tune it with, we have the fine tuner, so it's just much more safe for us to do that. The other ones are absolutely fine, but if your pegs do slip, then you can use a little bit of peg compound that you can just get from the local music store, online music store, local to you in your country, or maybe Amazon might sell something like that. Or the cheaper option is to use a little bit of bar of soap. So it has to be the bar of soap, not the not liquid soap or anything like, the actual bars of soap that you get. I've got one of those little ones that I took from a hotel many years ago, but it's just a really tiny one, and I keep it in my case. So you have to undo the string, obviously take the peg out, and then just rub a little bit of soap on the peg. And what that will do, when you put it back in again, the soap will just help the peg kind of turn round a little bit. So that's if your pegs are very difficult to turn. The opposite of that is, and I have fallen victim to this before, where I've put too much soap on there, you really just want the teeny tiniest bit of soap. So just rub a bit of soap on the peg, and you can just roll it between your fingers. So you only really need the tiniest amount, because too much and you'll find that the peg won't stay where it is. If you have done that, get a little bit of talcum powder on your fingers, kind of get rid of most of it, and then obviously take the peg out again, and then just put a little bit of talcum powder just to absorb a little bit of that soap. So you've still got some soap for some slip, but you've got the talcum powder to create grip. So just sort of play around it with that. But most people have got talcum powder of some kind kicking about the house. If you haven't, it's very cheap to get, and most people have got a bar of soap. And again, if you haven't, it's very cheap. It's very cheap to get hold of. But that's one way to kind of fix pegs, because I know a lot of people have a lot of problem with the pegs. If you have anything like open seams and open cracks, which is not very common, but I have had mine open up along here before, and I think they use like gut glue or something. It's not actual wood glue that they use. It's a different type of glue that luthiers use on here, and it can be very sensitive to heat and things like that, heat and cold. So if you have any cracks or opens, then that's going to cause that's going to cause you quite a problem in the sound. And then of course, if you've got any bow hair issues or anything like that, there isn't really an awful lot you can do if you've got bow hair issues, but the only thing you can do really is just have the bow re-haired. If your bow is particularly filthy, there are ways that you can clean the bow. What you can do is usually, bear with, so you can take this off the end, and then it all, wrong way, and then it all completely comes loose like this. Just make sure that when you do put it back on, you don't get this kind of twisted round. So what you can do is, and I have done a video of a deep clean of this, so you can take this off like this, and then you can sulk it in a bowl of spirits or something like that to kind of clean it. You don't really want to be doing it really that often unless you absolutely have to, because you'll find that you're just sort of drying out the horsehair. So I would only do it if it's sort of, last resort, but other than that, you don't really need to clean bow hairs. If your bow is just completely shot and it's just, it really is just no good and there's no life in it, then you might just have to get a new one. Depending on the bow, it may be worth taking to a violin luthier, and he can usually replace, you can keep the wood, replace the hair with some nice hair. I've had the wood replaced, I've had the hair replaced on this many years ago, and obviously I keep it in nice condition so I don't have to keep cleaning it. So those are the main questions that I had written down, and I was hoping by the time I'd got to the end of those that you guys would have some questions. So I know that Mia has a question about key signatures. We're back on that subject again. Let me just get out a piece of music. Okay, so don't get yourself bogged down too much with key signatures, and certainly don't let it stop you moving on. The theory side of things, especially with key signatures, is something that you need to know, but it does not stop you moving on in my course or any course or anything that you're doing with any teacher. It is a nice thing to know, and you really should know it because later on it will help you, but don't get bogged down with it. Don't let it stop you doing what you want to do. So I know you said in your comment that you put yesterday that you wanted a sort of a step by step. It doesn't sort of really work like that, but what you would do if you were playing this piece of music here, imagine this is an actual piece of music. So if you were playing a piece of music, the first thing you would do is look at the key signature. It's the first thing I do because I need to know what key I'm in. If I don't know what key I'm in, I literally don't know what I'm playing. I don't know whether I've got to play any sharps or flats or anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a look at the key signature, which is right there, okay? And we've got 2 flats. Now, if you don't know what key signature that refers to, then you need to go and learn that. So what you will then do is this going to work? So do you remember this that I've been using the last couple of weeks? So you will see, where is it? So it's there. So the 2 flats that we've got on here is there. So you now need to learn that is going to put us in the key of B flat major. Okay, so 2 flats mean B flat major. What 2 flats are they? B flat and E flat. So again, remember that, B flat and E flat. Then if you want to help yourself out as an optional thing, you can play the B flat major scale. When you play the B flat major scale, it's going to help you learn where you need to put your fingers. So for example, you are not going to be playing a B here on the A string. You're going to be playing a B all the way back there. When you play the B on the G string with the second finger, you're not going to be playing it there as normal. You're going to be playing it right next to the first finger. So that's really important that you know what at least if you don't know what the key is, i.e. B flat in this case, if you're thinking, oh, I haven't got a clue what key it is actually in, i.e. what scale it refers to, at least know what flats they are, B flat and E flat. And then you can think, right, so there's B flat there, E flat is about there, so that means no open E's, there's another E flat there, and so on. But the easiest thing to do is to know and understand what key that is in, i.e. B flat, so that you can relate that to B flat scale. So any key that a piece of music is in has a corresponding scale. So if we're in the key of A sharp, there's an A sharp scale. If we're in the key of F sharp, there's an F sharp scale. Do you sort of see what I mean? So all you have to do is learn this and know what this is. So that's kind of it. I don't want to talk too much about key signatures because I've just done that over the last 2 weeks. But if you've got any extra questions that you don't know, Mia, then just put them in the comments and I'll answer them privately for you. So let me just go on to answering some of your questions now. Bear with me a second. Finger shifting is difficult when playing G, D and A major. So shifting on the violin isn't that tricky. You just need to learn it. You just need to practice it. So the easiest way if you're practicing shifting, so if you're going from the first, so if we're playing, starting with a B on the A string, if we're playing, hang on, let me just turn my mic down a little bit. So if we want to play, let's do that. It's probably a better key. So if we want to play the first finger, the second finger and the third finger, but instead of playing the third finger, we want to jump up into third position. So what I would suggest you do is just practice sliding. Don't worry about the notes that you're getting in the middle. It doesn't really matter. What you really want to be practicing is just the sliding from. So you hit that note every single time. It's you can put a note down in between. It's a little bit kind of fiddly to sort of do that, because it isn't really how you would move. But if you want to just practice shifting, just do it like that. And then if you want to do a second finger, so what you're actually doing is you're practicing. It's a lot easier to do that, by the way, when you are actually playing it within pieces of music, which is why when we get to book 3, I have those shifting exercises in book 3. They must be lesson 22 or 23, I think, off the top of my head. But when you shift, it's a case of just moving the hand up like this. That's all you really need to do. So you don't want to be putting any grip on here or anything. It's just, that's where you will need to just make sure that you've got the hold of the violin here, so that your hand here is kind of free and not putting any pressure, so it can just slide up and down. So I've got hold of the violin here with my with my chin, or if you're using a shoulder rest or something like that, and then I'm able to freely move nicely like this without having to hold it with my hand. So if I'm not doing that, if I'm actually letting the hand do the holding and I'm not gripping here, if I move, I can move up. I can't. I'm not gonna move my hand down, because if I do that, I'll drop the violin on the floor. So that's all you really need to do for shifting. Practice shifting from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, or 1 to 2 to 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 to 1 to something like that, so that you can actually practice your hand moving kind of up and down this way. Let me see if there's anything else. Anne Mole says, lately during practice, I've noticed that my shoulder rest keeps loosening and eventually falling out. Which shoulder rest do you have? There are loads of shoulder rests that you can get, and there's only really one that I particularly recommend, which is, if I can get it, this one. This is the best shoulder rest that I recommend. It's called the Wolf. Which one is it? Yeah, it's the Forte Primo. Let me hold that up for you. Hang on, there you go. It's called the Wolf Forte Primo. Now, this fits 3/4 and 4/4 violin. So this is the Wolf Forte Primo. They do a Wolf Forte Secondo. Now, I don't like the Secondo because I don't like the little strip of metal that you get there, because it just keeps falling. This is the only one that I have found that does not slip off the violin. So you've got these nice little rubber bits here that stay on. This has never fallen off anybody's violin ever, but any other shoulder rest that any of my students have ever had have always dropped off the violin. And what happens is, when they take the violin down to just rest for a few minutes when we're having a chat, that is when it drops off the floor. So you can turn these as well, and obviously you can make them bigger here. I'm just going to leave it there, so you can obviously adjust the height of where the violin sits, but you probably just need to get a better shoulder rest. So all you do is just put it on. No way is that actually coming off. I mean, I physically have to pull it off to do that, and it doesn't cause any damage on the violin. So the Wolf Forte, the light's reflecting on it. I'll put a link to it or something so you can see it. So that's the one. So just get that. There's nothing worse than a falling shoulder rest. It's just so frustrating. Let me just have a look. What have we got? My question is about sharps, flats and neutrals. Do all notes have all 3? Okay, Bia. My question is about sharps, flats and neutrals. Do all notes have all 3? When I'm marking the music, this gets confusing for me at times. So yes, every single note can be a natural, every single note can be a sharp, and every single note can be a flat. It just depends on the key that the music is in, and it depends on whether there are any sharps and flats in it as well. So if we were actually, let's look at this one. So this one has 3 flats in it: a B flat, an E flat, and an A flat. So do you remember last week when we were talking about the order of sharps and flats, battle, ends, and? Do you remember I was showing you this one actually? Can you see that we've got it here, right there? The order of the sharps, Fred Charles goes down and ends battle, and the order of the flats, battle ends and down goes Charles Fred. So we've got this one here, battle, ends, and B flat, E flat, and A flat. So that means that we know now that any B we have to play in here, a high B, low B, it doesn't matter, any single B anywhere on the violin, all the B's in here have to be played as B flat, all the E's in here have to be played as E flat, and all the A's have to be played as A flat, except for you got there, instead of that being an E flat there, it wants you to play it as an E natural, another E natural there, and so on. So it really just depends on what the actual note is, but any note can be an F, can be an F flat, an F natural, F, normal F, or it can be an F sharp. However, there are some notes that we don't traditionally call by certain names. So example, an F flat, we would never really call an F flat, we'd call it an E natural. So that's called an enharmonic equivalent. So the enharmonic equivalent to F flat is E, or E natural, normal E. Let's choose another one. Let's say if we've got C sharp, the enharmonic equivalent to C sharp is D flat. So if I said, let me just put this down. So this probably brings me on to another question that I think you may have asked, or it may be someone else, I can't remember. But if we are playing a C sharp, so that's a C sharp, second finger on the A string, okay? So if someone said to me, Alison, play a C sharp, no problem. There we go, boom, a C sharp. If someone said to me, Alison, can you play me a D flat now? I'd be like, okay. Exactly the same note, because D flat and C sharp are exactly the same note. The enharmonic equivalent to C sharp is D flat. The enharmonic equivalent to D flat is C sharp. But why does anybody care about that? Well, because in the violin, not so much with the piano, so ignore the piano, and I'm not sure whether this applies for the other instruments or not, because I don't play any woodwind instruments or anything. But if we are playing a C sharp, it is going to be there. So open A, B, C sharp on the A string. Now, if I'm going to play a D flat, we know A, B, C, D, but it's a D flat, so it's going to be back. Now, look where that is. It is in exactly the same place as where I just played that C sharp. So C sharp, D flat, C sharp, D flat. So they are the same sounding note, but why would you play a C? Why would you play a C with a C sharp with a second finger and not play it with the third finger back? Generally, because of what the music says, it gets very confusing if you're playing a C sharp with a back third finger, because you associate the third finger as being a D. Open A, B, C, D, fourth finger as being E. So because we associate that third finger with being D, trying to force it into the whole of the C sharp, trying to kind of, so what is it they say, square peg round hole, trying to force a D flat into a C sharp, or trying to force a C sharp with a third finger and trying to force a D flat with a second finger. It doesn't make sense to do that. So even though they are the same sounding note, I would just play whichever finger is associated with that note. So I'm hoping that answers your question. I've got another question here. What do you think about carbon fiber violins? I don't know what I think about carbon fiber violins. I'll be honest. I've never played a carbon fiber violin. I don't really know anything about them, to be perfectly honest. I know they obviously do exist. I have just never played one. I'd like to play one. I think it would be quite interesting, but I unfortunately don't have an opinion. I have an opinion on carbon fiber bows. This is a Pernambuco bow, so that's probably the most popular kind of Brazil wood bow that you can get. Pernambuco bow is just a Pernambuco wood, sorry, is just a nice wood, but you can get other Brazilian type woods. I don't like carbon fiber bows because I don't feel you get the technical range of them like you would with a nice wood bow. This wood bow is a very expensive wood bow, so it's very responsive to the kind of techniques that I do and don't want to do and that kind of thing. So depending on the quality of your bow will depend on the flexibility of the wood and how it's made and the tension on the wood and all of that kind of stuff, and will determine what kind of technique you can and can't do on it and how good you are going to be depending on the skill level of the player. But I generally find, this is my personal opinion on this, so this doesn't mean to offend anyone that's got a carbon fiber bow. If you've got one of those and you love it, then that's fantastic. Bows will work differently for each person. So I could give someone this bow and it's absolute trash on them. It just does not work with their technique. This is why I cherry picked. I spent hours cherry picking this bow out of the 10 that I got sent from my violin luthier when I was choosing to buy this bow. And this was the one that I just kept going back to time and time again, because it worked with the violin I had, it worked with the technique, it worked with my arm, it worked with the weight, it just worked with me. So I just don't find that, technically speaking, with the carbon fiber bows, you get the right technique with it. I just don't like them. I just feel like they just won't do what I want them to do. They're not advanced enough, I guess, if you like. Right, a few more minutes left. Let's see if we've got anything else. Kathy says, when it comes to changing strings, should we try it ourselves or have a violin luthier change them for us? I know you have videos about it, but I'm too scared to do it myself. Absolutely do it yourself. Do not pay a violin luthier to change your strings. The worst thing that happens with your strings is that, annoyingly, you snap one and you have to go and buy another one, which is really sad when you've spent a fortune on them. One of my G strings will generally cost me about £100 to £120, so I do not want to be breaking that. But I have broken strings before when tuning them. They are generally the cheaper ones, so when I am tuning up my test violins, or I don't know, something, whatever it is, generally not mine. I don't play around with the strings on this. I just replace them as and when I sort of need to, and I generally replace them with the same strings because I'm just a creature of habit and I like them. But absolutely do it yourself. But you will find the cheaper the string, the more you will break them. So I do break strings if I'm buying those really cheap, nasty ones that you get from Amazon. And I'm talking kind of, they're not even a branded name. They're just the very cheap. I mean, you can get strings from Amazon that are even as low as £5. And I've bought them before to test on test violins that sometimes I just use for props or videos or something like that I'm not actually playing on or anything. But they're awful. They're really, really bad. And I have broke them before because they're just, everything about them is just not very nice. But absolutely change your own strings. The biggest tip I can give you is do one at a time. So never take all of your strings off. Take the A string off and replace it. Take the D string off, replace it. Take the G string off, replace it. Take the E string off. Obviously, if one's already come off and you've broken that anyway, replace that. But don't take them all off at once. Do them all individually. But yeah, I don't feel you need to take it to a violin luthier. I mean, do so if you really, really don't feel confident. But what you could do is buy yourself a cheap set first, just a cheap throwaway set, just so you can practice winding it on if you don't feel sort of confident to do it. But you're going to break the strings. I'll tell you this. People will break the strings because mostly they're using the cheapest strings anyway, and they are going to break. But what you need to do is when you put a string on, let's say I've put the string in there, I've wound it up here. What you want to do is wind the string so that it's reasonably taut, i.e., it's not kind of wobbling about. So it's nowhere near in tune, but the string is just a little bit is taut. Then you can put the rest of the strings on and sort of wind them up till they get to the same position, okay? And then bit by bit start tuning them. Now when I'm tuning a string, let me see if I can just let me just undo my A string. So I'm just undoing this a little bit. So imagine I've put this on and I've got the string till it's just a little bit taut. So it's not loose, it's just taut, and the bridge is able to stay up, but none of the strings are in tune. What I then do when I'm tuning it is, and that's it. That's all I will do for that one. And then I would do the same on the next one. So I move each one a very slight bit at a time. And do you know what? Changing a set of strings, I hate doing it. Absolutely hate doing it, but it takes me a good 30 minutes. If you're changing a set of strings in 5, you're going to break it. It takes a really long time. So once I've done that, then I'll go back to the A, and that's it. That's all I'll do. And then I'll do the same with the next one. Where people break is they're getting the A and they're getting the tune of the A in their head, and they're yanking that A all the way round like they're gearhead tuners, like it's a guitar. It's not. You cannot do that because you're putting too much stretch on the string. You're stretching that string all in one go, and it's going to break. So you need to give the string tension a little bit at a time. So tension the string, let it settle, let it do its thing. Tension the string, let it settle. Tension the string, let it settle. Never tune one string fully all at once. That is how you will break it. Little bit, move on to the next one. Little bit, move on to the next one a little bit. And then when you come back to the A again, listen for that A so you can hear how much out you are. And then that's it. It's still not quite there yet. And then I'm going to do the same with the rest of them. And then not quite there yet, but I'm going to do a little bit more. And do you sort of see what I mean? Sorry, I just wanted to get it back in tune again. So do it little and often. Never tune one string all the way to the top and sort of yank it round. Oh, it's not quite there, because that is how you're going to break it. If you don't do that, then you're going to be fine with that. So I'm going to end this here. What I'm going to do is I might do another one of these. If you all want another one of these Q&As, so I'm just out kind of answering random questions, but this is the whole point of me doing these live videos, so that I can just keep on chatting and keep on talking and just keep on waffling on until hopefully I answer somebody's question. So when we're finished, I'm going to make a note before they go. I'm going to make some of these questions that I can see that I've got coming up on the side. And if you want me to do another Q&A, I will do that. And what I will do is I will create a community post advertising next week's video, and that is where you can put those questions. So if I'm clever enough, I will make that post this evening, and I will post it underneath this video so that you can click on that post, for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about with community tabs and things like that. So I'll put that under there, and so underneath this video, head underneath this video, then you'll be able to either you can comment under this video if you like. I'll pick it up anyway. But if you want to put your questions underneath that community tab advertising next week's video, then I can collate the questions, and I can make some printouts if necessary, and have them on the screen for you and stuff like that. So I'm sorry if I haven't got to answering your questions. It does take a little bit of time, and I want to make sure I answer them thoroughly, hence the whole point of these lives. So let's do another Q&A next week, and I can finish answering the rest of the questions. I can see I've missed one from Chris Holland about favourite warm-up exercise. So I wanna get round to everybody's questions, because I know you've taken the time to be with me on this live this week. So I'll see you in next week's video. I'll set it up. I'll put a link underneath this video and in the comments so you know what's going on. And apologies again for the heinous start at the start, and hopefully we won't have that next week and it's problem sorted, and we haven't frozen in this week's video as well, so that's always a plus. So hopefully that's sorted too. And thank you for watching and bearing with, and I will see you all in next week's video. Bye.